Welcome back to another edition of the Derek Evans Show, where we talk about the Shinsei method and other topics relevant to you, to your business, to your work, to your family, to your life. Secret of well-being. In this segment, I want to talk about one of the important aspects of the Shinsei method, and really one of the most important aspects of life: well-being. I call well-being one of the three pillars of individuality, well-being, of course, and profitability. Inner strength, inner balance, self-trust. Of those, self-trust is the most important, particularly in this culture, particularly in this day and age, because there are a lot of distractions, there's a lot of misinformation about a lot of different things, and it becomes very difficult to filter through some of the things that are going on today, unless you have a level of independence, but of course self-trust. Self-trust is, as I see it, really equivalent to independence. Having an independent mind, an independent way of thinking. But that becomes very difficult to do if there's a lot of social pressures on you not to think independently, not to reason through topics, try to find positive and individually suitable solutions. But of course, that's the primary focus of the Shinsei method, to really strive toward finding practical solutions to everyday life, business, life, family, every aspect of business and life. And I developed the Shinsei method to be loosely translated from the Japanese to mean Shin, which is principle, being or mind, Sei, which means life, life principle. Because what I've found is that there's not a lot of practical advice, not a lot of practical insight, or at least not a lot of acceptance of that practical insight to help you to filter through some of the things that are going on and really help you make the important decisions in your life. I often talk about career because it's one of the most important decisions that you'll make, and I've talked about that on another segment of the show, which you can find at the Shinsei Method YouTube channel, and more information at theshinseimethod.com. But I talk about career a lot because career is one of the most important decisions that you'll make, and choosing a career wisely, and you've heard that many times. Many people talk about choosing a career wisely, but they don't really explain what does wisely really mean. When I say wisely, I mean choosing a career or making any choice that's important to you, the choice of a partner or a mate, the choice of a place to live, the choice of a home, the choice of a friend, the choice of a recreation. Now, of course, those choices have they're going to be made within some kind of limitation in your present environmental surroundings or your community. There's certain limitations to what you can and cannot do, and let's face it, there's certain regulations, there's certain rules and laws that govern what you can and cannot do, how you do it. And so complete and absolute freedom is not something that we often talk about and that is reasonable to expect, because there are other people living in the world, and there's a certain expectation that you're going to take those other people into consideration. That's well understood. But what I've also found is that if you're the type of person to do that, to take that matter seriously, very often what happens is you get lost in the shuffle. And I've lived many years of my life doing just that, and I've come to the realization that it's important to establish a level of balance. One of the primary purposes and goals of the Shinsei method to establish one of those pillars: individuality, well-being, profitability. Balance or inner balance. Self-trust, of course, is also important. Inner strength. To me, understanding those three for yourself, how they apply for your life when you're making important decisions like career, like the choice of a mate or partner, a marital partner, for example, like the choice of a community, a home, a friend, etc. When you're making those important choices in life, it's important to understand what those pillars mean for you. What does it mean to have a certain level of self-trust? Well, as I understand it, as it means to me personally, having self-trust is a realization that the decisions that you make are based upon a sequence of logic, that you've reached a realization of the values, the views, the policies, practices, and procedures that you hold, particularly the values. You've reached that understanding of values based upon a sequence of logic. In other words, you've thought about what's important to you to achieve And those achievements, those goals, make a certain level of sense. So reasonableness then becomes an important principle. Now, this is the process of Shinsei, of understanding Shinsei, of applying Shinsei, of living Shinsei. And when I developed the Shinsei method as a method of self-training and self-development, I considered the social settings. Because very often, when you pursue those fundamental principles, those fundamental values, you don't get a lot of social support. That's why self-trust becomes so crucial for the Shinsei method and for living in general. Because when you apply fundamental principles in your life, and to me, the application of fundamental principles are one of the bases upon which the Shinsei method was developed, but also it's one of the bases for well-being. When you establish a well-being, I should say, as a primary goal in your life, you're striving toward fundamental principles in your life. Principles like clarity, principles like strength, like balance, but particularly balance. And balance because, particularly in the American culture today, there's a focus on extremes, unfortunately. And so to establish a way of operating that is contrary to that requires a level of self-trust. And self-trust is not that easy to develop, particularly if you don't have it from the beginning. If you're lucky to have parents that establish these fundamental principles for you and then train you over a period of time during your formative years, then you're really a step ahead. But very often I've found most parents don't do that. They're doing other things. And I'm speaking from personal experience. My parents did not do this. I've had to learn these lessons really through struggling with various things, including depression. Trying to solve that very real problem for myself and find a practical solution. Because if I follow with what I was told by certain professionals, by certain other people, by certain friends who said they were friends, I was really led in inappropriate directions. So ultimately, when you make a decision for yourself, you have to determine your own direction. But that's not that easy to do. It's very easy to say that, but it's not so easy to do if you don't understand how you think, your patterns of thinking, your policies, your practices, your procedures. That's not that easy to do if you don't get a lot of social support to do that. If you do those kinds of things, if you take that approach, let's say in work, and you don't get promoted, but someone else who doesn't do that does get promoted, it starts to make you wonder, well, what's the value of this? What's the value to me? What's the practical value? Again, I'm speaking from personal experience. The practical value is building a practice, a policy, a procedure, a view, an orientation, a perspective that's oriented toward self-trust, inner strength, inner balance, really produces much more desirable results in your life. And you'll have to do that for yourself and then verify it for yourself by looking at the products of your life, by looking at the products of your actions. Action is the most potent form of communication. That's one of the things I wrote in one of my previous books on communication and motivation, both of which you can find at Amazon.com. And I wrote in one of those books that action was the most potent form of communication because it is. Actions communicate your values. Many people focus on words, particularly when they're talking about relationships, but it's not the words that become very important to you, it's the actions, because actions demonstrate what's really important to a person. That applies to other people, but it also applies to yourself. So if you look at the actions of your life and you look at the results of your life, your lifestyle, how you're living, are you satisfied with it? This is the process I had to go through myself. When I looked at my lifestyle, and my lifestyle was okay, my perspective was okay, but the results of my life I wasn't satisfied with. And I started to wonder why. Why could I not achieve the kinds of things that I wanted to achieve? I'm goal-oriented. Discipline is important to me. It's an important principle. I'm very disciplined when it comes to exercise, for example. I'm very disciplined when it comes to work. Work is important. It's an important principle to me. I have the right work ethic. So what's going on? What gives? These are the questions I had to ask for myself, and this is, again, how I developed the Shinsei method, because that's a form of self-analysis, to ask yourself, what's going on? What do these terms mean to me? What does it mean to establish a goal? What does it mean to establish a career? What does it mean to have a lifestyle? What does it mean to have a life to me? Now, this is a philosophical exercise in one sense, but it's also a practical exercise, because what you're trying to do is understand something about your patterns of thinking. This is very crucial to do because it allows you to arrive at a stable position in your life, a stable way of looking at things, a stable mindset. Now, this is also a very reasonable approach to reality, a very reasonable approach to work, to life, to family, to education. But unfortunately, in many social settings, you don't get a lot of social support for that. In fact, what I talked about at the Shinsei Fitness channel, and what I talk about often on the Shinsei Fitness show, is this application of balance in your fitness programs, as an example. And one of the things, if you're exercising for well-being, that I've found is very important is to balance strong exercise or heavy exercise with light exercise. Well, light exercise doesn't seem to be very common for many fitness trainers, in many gyms, and many fitness training programs, sometimes even for many physical therapists. Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm also not a psychologist. I don't offer advice in any of those areas. What I am really providing is practical insight that's based upon my experience through struggling with many of these things in many of these different areas. Because the ultimate goal for me has always been self-development, sometimes called enlightenment. These are important principles. But in many social settings, you don't get a lot of support for that. And sometimes in very important social settings for yourself, like a marital setting. That's a social setting. Marriage is very important. Relationships are very important. But a lot of times you don't get a lot of support for that from your family. Maybe many of your family members don't do that. So, for example, in my personal life, exercise and fitness has been important, very important. For me, I've trained in self-defense and martial arts for many years, many decades. I started running outside and exercise as a runner. I don't run anymore because of knee problems and the difficulties with the joints, but I still do walk. Do also bicycle and train with weights and sandbags and bands and do many different things to continue in exercise at my level. In 56, I have a certain amount of years. And so I'm not as young as I used to be. I started in powerlifting, which I don't do, but I still maintain the strong emphasis on strength training within my limitation. And I bring that up only to emphasize balance. That it's through that process of analyzing really training and adjusting that training over time and being flexible in my mentality that I came to realize that balance in training was very important by using, let's say, light training as a form of recovery rather than just hitting it hard and not doing anything the next day. Rather, training at a moderate pace and then doing something on the next day that's very light to complement that. So if you walk on one day, you train in weights the next day, maybe light, maybe moderate, and then walk light. And then the next day, instead of doing nothing, maybe training with bands, rubber bands. They're basically big rubber bands. But band training, which is rubber training, or doing something that's very light. Or even isometric exercises or Pilates type exercises that emphasize the core. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about fitness in this show, in this segment of the show, on the Derek Evans show versus the Shinsei Fitness show, because what I wanted to emphasize is that really there is no demarcation, there is no artificial separation between fitness and life and work, and everything you do is based upon you, because ultimately you carry yourself in everything you do. So anything you develop in your life, whether it's fitness, whether it's health, whether it's your perspective, whether it's your emotional component, whether it's your work, whether it's your business, whether it's your personal relationships, whatever you're doing, it's important to understand that it's you as an individual that is going to be the common denominator in all of those things. So when you develop yourself for yourself, when you develop yourself and some of the goals that you have, the ideas you have, you take that development in everything else that you do. So if you take the approach, let's say, in fitness of balancing your training programs and emphasizing balance, that can equally apply in your everyday life. And that really is one of the secrets of well-being. One of the secrets of well-being is the focus on principle, balance, stability, clarity, consistency. And then, of course, things like discipline, integrity, doing things that are going to be, that you can repeat, and then analyzing that process and determining whether or not you have to make certain adjustments, and then reevaluating, and then repeating that process. That becomes the process of training. But it also becomes the process of developing competence and proficiency. In martial arts, it's called shugyo or zanshin. These terms I like because they emphasize a level of expertise that you don't quite ever achieve completely. You strive toward it, but you do get better at it by continuing to practice, but not just in a mindless way, not just practicing for practice sake, practicing in a way that is going to produce the most desirable results. And I have found that's a very useful approach, not just for physical training, but also for everyday living. And that really is the sum and substance of the principle of Shinsei and the idea of Shinsei. So when I talk about the secret of well-being, of course, is principle. The application of principle from various areas of life to various areas of life with the ultimate goal of self-development. And understanding what self-development means, understanding what well-being means, understanding what principle means, and thinking about these terms in a regular way, on a daily basis, so that you can come to some realization for yourself that of these principles and how they apply in your life in a practical way that work for you. Once you've achieved that, you're really moving toward self-trust, understanding something about self-trust, and then looking at the results, verifying the results. In this case, results represent really facts of life. Looking at whether or not your results are more desirable and then making the adjustments. And it's through that process, it's really a scientific process, that process of experimentation, but not experimentation in a way that many people understand it, just trying something willy-nilly. You're trying something in a scientific way where you are thinking about what is likely to produce the most desirable results, trying it, that becomes the experimentation process. And then reevaluating that. It's not willy-nilly. It's really goal-oriented. But it's really coming to the realization that you have the ultimate control over your life, over your destiny, because you have the ultimate control over how you think. And it's coming to that realization that I have found to be very difficult in many ways, because you've heard that before, I'm sure. Many people say that. But it's very difficult to apply it in everyday life because the social support is not there. And it's really that level of self-trust that is required to continue in this path, despite the fact that you don't have a lot of social support. Despite that you may not get financial rewards in some cases. Are you able to stick it through? You have to sometimes make certain choices about what you do. Maybe it's not an ideal choice until you get where you would like to be, or you get where you can be satisfied at least. Sometimes you can achieve exactly what you want. But there may be a certain compromise, not just compromising your values, but compromising really your level. Maybe you can't become a billionaire. Maybe that's not too terribly important. These are things that you have to think about, because there are certain limitations in no matter what you do and no matter what you try to accomplish, because the social environment, the political environment, the regulatory environment, these all make a difference. And altering or adjusting your approach in a way that is going to take into consideration what's going on in reality, what's going on in the political realm, what's going on in the cultural realm, in your community, in the economic realm, what's going on in your environment, versus what's individually suitable to you, and then striking that balance. To me, again, that is the secret of well-being. Striking that balance between what you can do socially, what's appropriate to do for you individually, and then figuring out a strategy that works for you given those two. It took me a long time to make that realization, and I continue to remind myself about how important it is Really, what I have found, self-trust has a lot to do with self-reminders, reminding yourself, particularly when you have certain doubts, reminding yourself that this way that you've chosen is valid and valuable, and you know that because it's produced very desirable results for you. I have found one of the easiest ways to do that is, again, through physical fitness. That's why I brought that in this segment of the show. Because it's physical fitness that allows you to be able to see the fruits of your results in a relatively short period of time, sometimes even weeks and months. If you embark on a sensible fitness training program, you can see the results almost instantaneously. And then you can see that this approach, you can see the physical results, the tangible results of the balanced approach. It works. And then you can use that as a basis upon which to build self-trust. That's the strategy that I have taken, and that's the strategy that I extend to you by way of the Shinsei method, and that's really what the Shinsei method is all about. Until the next time on the Derek Evans Show, where we talk about the Shinsei method and other topics relevant to you, to your business, to your work, to your family, to your life.